Young and the Restless spoilers full episodes. The humiliation Diane endured was horrific. She was threatened. The image kept repeating itself, each time becoming clearer. Diane had always loved Jack, considering him the most important person in her life. Diane had followed Victor's orders countless times, and he had been excessively demanding. The next moment, she stood in the Abbott's family living room, treated like an enemy by the man she loved. Initially, the pain was unbearable, but gradually it became colder and more dangerous. Diane realized that the situation was no longer about self-defense or pleading for understanding. It had become a war, and in war, hesitation only guarantees defeat. Patty was now rumored to be the one destroying the Abbott family, and would she be able to preserve what she desired? There were hidden forces at work, and Diane soon realized that the most powerful hand behind the chaos in Genoa City almost always belonged to Victor Newman. Victor was the true kingpin of Genoa, but he was too old. He could no longer hold himself together. He was a man who believed power was his inherent right, but every strategist with power has weaknesses, and Victor's weakness was always the same. His empire was everything to him, but his family was even more important. Nikki, Nick, and Victoria were the only weakness he can never fully protect. And in that moment, Diane understood something that changed everything. She didn't need to fear Victor anymore. If she wanted Jack back, she had to corner Victor, a corner he couldn't control. On a night of heavy rain, Diane decided to go to Nikki's house to talk about Victor. They wanted to find a solution. The conversation was initially tense but polite, full of vague accusations and carefully considered words. Diane looked exhausted, almost desperate, as if she had only come to talk about the mess surrounding Jack. Nikki let her in, perhaps believing Diane was finally ready to accept reality. Nick and Victoria arrived shortly after, equally suspicious but curious about Diane's reason for coming. The atmosphere was heavy with unresolved hostility, but no one anticipated what was about to happen next. Diane calmly walked into the kitchen under the pretext of preparing coffee and a late meal. Her hands didn't tremble as she worked, even as she secretly slipped sleeping pills into the food. It was a quiet, calculated act, only taking seconds, but it would change everything. Just minutes later, the effects began to kick in. Nikki's voice trembled before she tried to continue the conversation, her words becoming jumbled. Nick noticed something was wrong as a wave of dizziness washed over him. Victoria tried to stand, but her strength drained her before she could take even one more step. Everyone was unconscious, a perfect plan orchestrated by Diane, and fear gripped them all. The fear she had harbored for so long had vanished, replaced by a strange sense of clarity. She began to act swiftly, tying their wrists and binding them to heavy chairs in the middle of the room. When Nikki slowly regained consciousness, the first thing she saw was Diane standing over her, her expression almost eerily calm. Nick and Victoria woke up shortly afterward, struggling against the ropes, their confusion turning into terror as they realized what had happened. Then Diane made a phone call. Victor answered, the image of Nikki, Nick, and Victoria screaming for help filling him with dread. Diane said it was a deal. Bring Jack back to his family, or they would all die tonight. No more talking, everything was in her hands. Diane was so calm and composed. Was she threatening Victor? Her voice held no panic, no hesitation, only a cold determination that made each word sound like a long declared statement. She told Victor he had only one chance to make amends for the damage he had caused. Jack had to return to his family. Victor was terrified, but he managed to remain calm, saying, "Be quiet. I will comply with your demands." Jack would survive, and he would not be in danger. Diane hung up coldly, ignoring Nikki and Nick's screams. Victor was terrified.
The heavy mahogany desk in the executive office of Newman Enterprises felt like an island of absolute control, precisely the way Victor Newman liked it. The sprawling view of the Genoa City skyline beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows was a testament to his empire, a kingdom built on ruthless calculation and unyielding devotion to his family. But the sudden, sharp trill of his private, unlisted cell phone shattered the quiet authority of the room. It was a number known only to his inner circle. Victor did not rush to answer. He allowed it to ring twice, his piercing gaze dropping to the screen. Unknown caller, a muscle feathered in his jaw. He picked up the device, his thumb swiping the screen with deliberate slowness. Victor Newman, he answered his baritone voice, a low rumble of command, betraying none of the irritation he felt at the intrusion. Listen very carefully, Victor. A distorted, mechanically altered voice slithered through the earpiece. The synthetic modulation scraped against his eardrums like jagged metal. I have them. Victor leaned back in his leather chair, his posture instantly stiffening. Who is this? If this is some sort of pathetic prank, I assure you, you have dialed the wrong number. No prank, Victor, the voice hissed, the cadence eerily rhythmic. I have your precious wife, I have your golden boy, and I have your brilliant daughter. Nikki, Nick, and Victoria are in my custody. You will do exactly as I say, or you will never see any of them alive again. A cold, razor-thin sliver of ice slid down Victor's spine, but his outward demeanor remained entirely composed. He had faced down corporate raiders, mobsters, and psychopaths. He did not rattle. You expect me to believe you have managed to abduct my family, Nikki, Nick, and Victoria, all three of them? Victor let out a dry, humorless chuckle. You are either incredibly stupid or dangerously delusional. I assure you I am neither, the voice replied. They are locked away far from your security detail, far from your reach. You will transfer the assets I demand, and you will publicly concede the Newman Media acquisitions, or Genoa City will be attending a triple funeral. Victor's mind raced, filtering through the list of his current adversaries. The timing, the audacity, the specific mention of the recent corporate acquisitions, it all pointed in one very specific, very familiar direction. The Abbotts were currently in disarray, but there was one snake in the grass who had been slithering dangerously close to his territory lately. Diane Jenkins. Diane, Victor said, his voice dropping an octave, dripping with absolute contempt. Did you really think hiding behind a voice modulator would conceal your stench? You have always been a master of cheap theatrics, but this is a new low even for you. There was a fraction of a second of silence on the line, a tiny microscopic pause that told Victor everything he needed to know. The kidnapper didn't confirm the identity, but the shift in the breathing pattern on the other end gave her away. You think this is a game, Victor. The voice snapped, the mechanical distortion failing to mask the sudden spike of genuine venom. I think you are a desperate woman, Diane, Victor countered, leaning forward, his hands planting firmly on the polished wood of his desk. You are trying to leverage a threat you cannot possibly back up. You want me to believe you have Nikki, that you overpowered Nick, that you outsmarted Victoria. Please, you couldn't trap a mouse if it was already in a cage. You are making a grave mistake, the voice warned. No, you are, Victor fired back, his tone turning lethal. If you want me to even entertain this ridiculous charade, you will provide proof, solid, irrefutable proof that my family is in your possession. Until then, you are nothing but a nuisance making empty threats on a burner phone. Do you hear me? Bring me proof, or I will trace this call, find you, and crush you myself. He ended the call, slamming the phone down on the desk. Miles away, in a dimly lit, damp basement of an abandoned industrial complex on the outskirts of the city, Diane Jenkins hurled her burner phone against the concrete wall. The plastic casing shattered, sending fragments skittering across the dusty floor. Her chest heaved, her eyes blazing with a toxic mixture of rage and humiliation. Damn him, Diane, shrieked, her hands balling into tight fists, her perfectly manicured nails biting into her palms. Damn his arrogance. He never believes me. He always thinks he's the smartest person in the room. He thinks I'm nothing. She paced the length of the narrow corridor outside the holding room, her heels clicking a frantic, erratic rhythm against the concrete. The damp air clung to her skin, but she barely noticed the chill. The heat of her fury was enough to keep her warm. She had meticulously planned this operation. She had hired the most discreet, ruthless mercenaries money could buy. She had studied the Newman security protocols until she knew their blind spots better than Victor's own head of security. She had executed the impossible, snatching the Newman matriarch and her two eldest children right out from under Victor's nose. And yet, he still dismissed her. He still looked down on her from his ivory tower, treating her like a pesky insect to be swatted away. He wants proof, Diane muttered to herself, a cruel, twisted smile slowly stretching across her face. The anger in her eyes crystallized into something far more dangerous, pure, unadulterated malice. I'll give him proof. I'll give him a nightmare he will never wake up from. She turned on her heel and marched toward the heavy steel door at the end of the hall. She signaled to the two hulking guards flanking the entrance. "Open it," she commanded, her voice devoid of any warmth. "And, get the camera ready, mister. Newman has requested a private screening." Back in his office, Victor paced the length of his Persian rug. He had already dispatched his head of security to locate Nikki, Nick, and Victoria, but the silence from their respective phones was deafening. He told himself it was a coincidence, a dead battery, a meeting, but the knot tightening in his gut suggested otherwise. Suddenly his phone buzzed, a text message from an encrypted number, an attachment. Victor stopped dead in his tracks. He picked up the phone, his thumb hovering over the play button for a fraction of a second before pressing it. The screen flickered to life, the high-definition display illuminating the darkness of a grim, windowless room. The camera panned slowly, deliberately capturing the horrific tableau. They're bound tightly to heavy metal chairs were his wife and children. Nikki was in the center, her elegant designer blouse torn at the shoulder, her blonde hair disheveled. Her eyes, usually so full of fire and grace, were wide with genuine terror as she struggled fruitlessly against the thick zip ties biting into her wrists. To her left, Nick was straining against his bindings with brute force, his jaw clenched, the muscles in his neck bulging as he let out a muffled, furious roar through the heavy duct tape plastered across his mouth. On Nikki's right, Victoria looked pale and disoriented, a streak of dirt and what looked like dried blood smudged across her cheek. She was trembling, her chest rising and falling in rapid, panicked breaths. The camera zoomed in on Nikki's face. A gloved hand entered the frame, roughly grabbing her chin and forcing her to look directly into the lens. Nikki let out a muffled sob, a sound that tore straight through Victor's chest and shredded his heart. The video lasted only 15 seconds before cutting to black. Victor stood frozen, the phone gripped so tightly in his hand that the casing groaned in protest. The silence in his office was now suffocating. The image of Nikki's terrified eyes burned into his retinas, searing his soul. Before Victor could even process the visceral shock of the footage, the phone rang again. He answered it instantly, not bothering to hide the urgency in his movements. "Did you enjoy the show, Victor?" The voice was no longer masked by a synthetic modulator. It was Diane, her natural voice, smooth, cultured, and dripping with venomous satisfaction, echoed through the speaker. She wanted him to know it was her. She wanted the credit. "Diane," Victor growled, his voice trembling with a rage so profound it felt like a physical weight. "If you touch one hair on their heads, I swear to God, you'll—" "What?" Victor Diane interrupted, her tone icy and utterly devoid of fear. "Destroy me, ruin me. You've already tried that. You've spent years trying to erase me, trying to make me feel insignificant. But who has the power now? Look at your screen, Victor. Look at your precious family. They aren't in your ivory tower anymore. They are in my world now." Okay? "What do you want?" Victor demanded, his mind calculating 100 different strategies, searching for a weakness, a crack in her armor. "I want compliance," Diane stated coldly. "I want the Newman Media assets transferred to the shell accounts I've provided. I want a public statement of your retirement, effectively handing over the reins of your empire. And I want it done by midnight tonight. If you try to trace me, if you call the authorities, or if you miss the deadline by a single second, the next video I send you will be of my men executing your golden boy, Nick. Then Victoria, and I will save Nikki for last, just so she can watch her children die before I end her misery." "You are insane," Victor breathed, the sheer brutality of her threat catching him off guard. "No, Victor, I am finally in control," Diane whispered. Tick-tock. The clock is running. The line went dead. Victor slammed his fist onto the desk, the impact rattling his silver pen set. He forced himself to take a deep, stabilizing breath. Panic was a luxury he could not afford. He was Victor Newman. He solved problems. He crushed enemies. He did not succumb to fear. He sat down heavily in his chair, pulling the video up on his computer monitor to view it on a larger screen. He played it again, and again, and again. His analytical mind went to work desperately searching for anomalies. In the modern age, technology could fabricate anything. Deepfakes, AI-generated imagery. He had used such tactics himself to manipulate his rivals. He scrutinized the lighting, looking for unnatural shadows. He examined the way the duct tape stretched across Nick's mouth, searching for pixelation or digital blurring. He stared at the tear in Nikki's blouse, trying to determine if the fabric moved organically with her frantic breathing. "It has to be a fake," Victor muttered to himself, leaning closer to the screen until his nose almost touched the glass. Diane doesn't have the resources to pull off a synchronized kidnapping of this magnitude. She's bluffing. She hired a digital effects studio. This is a fabrication. But as he watched the footage for the 20th time, a cold, insidious anxiety began to creep into his veins, wrapping around his heart like a vice. The terror in Nikki's eyes, it was too real. The specific way Nick's shoulder hitched when he strained against the ties, an old football injury that only the family knew about. The way Victoria's left eye twitched slightly when she was in a state of extreme panic. An AI could mimic faces, but could it perfectly capture the nuanced microscopic physical tells of his children? Could it replicate the exact shade of profound despair in his wife's eyes? The walls of his spacious office suddenly felt like they were closing in. The invulnerable armor he had worn for decades felt paper thin. For the first time in a very long time, Victor Newman felt the icy grip of helplessness. Victor's hand hovered over the intercom button. He needed to call his security chief. He needed to mobilize his private investigators. He needed to call the police commissioner, but he hesitated. Diane's threat echoed in his mind. Asterisk, if you try to trace me, if you call the authorities, the next video I send you will be of my men executing your golden boy. Asterisk, could he risk it? If Diane was truly unhinged enough to orchestrate this, she might be unhinged enough to follow through on the executions. But capitulating to her demands, handing over his empire, giving her the ultimate victory, was equally unthinkable. It went against every instinct in his body. "She's playing a game," Victor reasoned aloud, his voice rough. "She's trying to force a rash decision. She wants me panicked. She wants me to act without thinking." He needed time. Time to trace the burner phone despite her warnings. Time for his security team to find a footprint, a camera feed, a witness. He needed to stall her. He picked up his phone and dialed the number Diane had called from. It rang 4 times before she picked up. "Have you completed the transfers?" Victor Diane asked, her voice laced with arrogant anticipation. "These things take time." "Diane," Victor said, his tone deliberately measured, projecting a calm he did not feel. "You are asking for the liquidation of massive corporate assets. It requires board signatures, banking clearances. I cannot simply press a button and hand you a billion-dollar media conglomerate." "Don't play games with me," Victor Diane snapped. "I know how much power you wield. You can bypass the board if you want to." "I am telling you the logistical reality," Victor countered smoothly. "I am willing to meet your demands, but I need 24 hours to ensure the funds clear the international accounts without triggering federal money laundering flags. If the SEC freezes the assets, you get nothing." In the dank basement, Diane's eyes narrowed. She paced slowly in front of the heavy steel door, the phone pressed hard against her ear. She listened to the smooth, rich baritone of Victor's voice. He sounded too calm, too rational. He was stalling. A bitter laugh escaped her lips. "You really think I'm that stupid, Victor? You think I don't know you're sitting in your office right now, your IT team desperately trying to ping my location? You think I don't know you're trying to buy time to send your goons after me? I am simply explaining the financial realities of your extortion." Victor maintained his voice unwavering. "No," Diane hissed, her fury reigniting into a blinding inferno. "You are hesitating. You still don't respect me. You still think you can outmaneuver me. You think because you are the great Victor Newman, the rules of gravity don't apply to you. Diane, be reasonable." "Reasonable," Diane screamed, her voice echoing off the concrete walls, startling the armed guards. I am done being reasonable. I gave you a chance to save them cleanly, and you are trying to play chess while I am holding a gun to your queen's head. She didn't wait for his response. She ended the call and shoved the phone into her pocket. Her chest heaved as she glared at the steel door. Victor needed a harsher lesson. A simple video wasn't enough. He needed to hear the pain. He needed to feel the consequences of his arrogance. You, Diane, pointed to the largest of her hired mercenaries, a man with cold, dead eyes and a scar running down his neck. Go in there. The son, Nick, I want you to break 2 of his fingers. Make sure the mother and sister are watching, and make sure he screams loud enough for the microphone to pick it up perfectly. I'm going to send Victor an audio file he can use as his new ringtone. The mercenary nodded silently, pulling a pair of heavy leather gloves from his belt as he moved toward the door. Diane watched him enter, her heart pounding with a sickening, adrenaline-fueled thrill. She had crossed the Rubicon. There was no going back now. She would break Victor Newman piece by piece, starting with the bones of his children. In the penthouse heights of Newman Enterprises, the silence was agonizing. Victor stared at his phone, the screen now dark. The call had ended abruptly, and the finality of the click resonated in his mind like a judge's gavel. Diane had sensed his hesitation. She had seen right through his stalling tactic. Victor stood up, his massive frame suddenly feeling heavy burdened by the immense weight of the crown he wore. He walked over to the floor-to-ceiling window, looking out over Genoa City, the city he had conquered, the empire he had built from nothing. It all felt entirely meaningless in the face of the suffocating dread tightening around his throat. His mind was a battlefield of conflicting instincts. Option 1, he could call her bluff. He could deploy his vast network of resources, tear the city apart brick by brick, and hunt her down. It was the Newman way. Never surrender. Never negotiate with terrorists. But if he was wrong, if his security team was even a minute too late, he would be the architect of his own family's slaughter. He would have to live the rest of his life knowing his pride cost Nikki her life. Option 2, he could surrender. He could sign the papers, transfer the wealth, and broadcast his defeat to the world. He would be giving Diane Jenkins the ultimate victory, allowing her to humiliate him on a global stage. He would lose a massive chunk of his legacy. But he would save his family. The tension in his jaw was so intense it ached. His hands, usually so steady, trembled slightly as he gripped the edge of his desk. He looked at the framed photograph sitting near his computer, a picture of him, Nikki, Nick, and Victoria, smiling at a gala years ago. They looked so safe, so untouchable. The phone on his desk began to vibrate again. Another message from Diane. Victor closed his eyes, a profound, agonizing war raging within his soul. The great Victor Newman, the man who controlled destinies and destroyed dynasties, was paralyzed. He had to make a choice. He had to decide whether to trust his instincts and fight, risking the blood of his loved ones, or bow to a woman he despised and lose his empire. The phone continued to buzz relentlessly, demanding an answer as the shadows in the office grew longer and the clock ticked mercilessly toward midnight. The patriarch of the Newman family stood alone in the silence, facing the most devastating decision of his life. The game was over. The nightmare had just begun. All that remained was for Victor to make his move. The phone vibrated one last time, sliding slightly across the polished mahogany. Victor opened his eyes, the steely resolve returning, though tinged with an unprecedented, haunting fear. He reached out, his fingers wrapping around the cold metal of the device. It was time to choose.